Look, everyone's been talking about that game 4 between the Leafs and the Bruins. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole. It's been talked about tons. The one thing I will say, though, is everybody seems to be talking about the Leafs, especially with the stop effing crying, bro, from Nylander. The Bruins leaders really set the tone and came out and took that game, notably Marchand, Pastrnak, and Swayman. Despite the mess that was going on the Leafs side of things that really took over all the headlines and the narratives, what was happening on the Bruins side of things was pretty impressive. It's looking like we'll have plenty more time to talk about the Bruins in depth, though, in future series, so I'll leave that for then. But not just for this Leafs team, for this Leafs franchise, it's big picture time here. Yes, firing Sheldon Keefe, moving on from Brendan Shanahan, those are both very much on the table, and those definitely aren't small. Like, those are sizable moves that affect the future of this franchise in a big way. But I think what the people who follow this team, and honestly hockey fans in general, are expecting here is the big one. It's time to shake up the core four. To be honest with you, I think it was time after the Montreal series in 2021, blowing that 3-1 series lead. But here we are, and even Elliotte Friedman on 32 Thoughts mentioned that if they don't pull off this big comeback here and beat the Bruins, the core four is getting shaken up. Now, to be honest with you, I'd be shocked if all four players were moved by the start of next season. That's just not realistic. Auston Matthews and William Nylander are probably safe, mostly on account of their new contracts, but I also just get the sense that those are going to be the two main building blocks going forward for this team. Plus, Marner and Tavares both have 1 year left on their contracts after this one. It just makes the most sense to move them. Starting with Marner, I mean, every time the Leafs blow a series, almost like an Easter tradition, it feels like the Marner trade rumors really start to swirl. He always seems to be the one who garners the most attention in that respect, and this really feels like the year where we might actually see it. Now, this is the Toronto Maple Leafs we're talking about, so expect the unexpected. But man, you've just locked up Matthews and Nylander to huge money contracts. In order for a big shakeup to happen, you need to trade a significant piece with trade value, and I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, Marner doesn't have a lot of trade value. Who's going to want to trade for a guy who's a ghost in the playoffs? Listen, a guy with Marner's talent and offensive ability, like, teams will be lining up to acquire this guy. There are a ton of teams who are super desperate for an offensive dynamo on their team like that, especially at that age. 26 years old, he's in his prime. Like, the Leafs will absolutely be able to get something good for Marner. As for Tavares, that one definitely is trickier to move given the age, the salary, and the decline, but he's still a good player, and what works in Toronto's favor here is that he has 1 year left on his deal. Retaining salary, even on big money for 1 year, is something that teams do all the time, and it's way easier to stomach from a Leafs perspective, especially if they can get a third team involved for double retention, which it feels like almost every trade does nowadays. Then all of a sudden you're selling a highly discounted John Tavares who can still produce pretty well as a second or at the very least third line forward. He's got the name recognition, he'll sell jerseys, he's got good leadership skills, he's really good with the media, you can put him out there after tough losses, and you're not locked into a long contract with a 33-year-old. 1 year, and then you can move on if you want. I'm not sure how much value you can get out of a Tavares traded for the Leafs. I mean, obviously not as much as Marner, but I also don't think it will be magic beans nothing. Like, at the very least, worst case scenario, you've got the cap space from a Tavares trade heading into free agency, so I definitely see this as something that could definitely happen this summer. Then, of course, there's lots of other stuff you can look at, like Liljegren and TJ Brody's money come off the books this year, especially Brody gets paid $5 million. That opens up a lot of doors for a defense core that definitely needs to be changed. Samsonov also becomes a free agent on July 1st. That's $3.5 million coming off the books, and Joseph Woll is still signed for another year at under $800K, which is really cheap for a really good backup option. Change is definitely coming for this Maple Leafs group, unless again they could pull off a miraculous comeback against Boston. And I know for a lot of other teams 3-1 is not miraculous, but for the Leafs, winning Game 7 in Boston, this really seems like a hope and a prayer here. If you were Brad Treliving, let me know in the comments what you would do with the Leafs this summer. What moves would you make? Who would you want to bring in as coach? Maybe president even? Put it all down there. I'll be reading it intently. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. I'll see you in the next one. You're awesome.